You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, and showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your livestock, nor the stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Each of us is familiar with the 10 Commandments. What were the moral teachings that God gave Moses? The tablets with these teachings were to be kept, as they were valid for the covenant. However, at this point, a serious problem arises. People have a completely mistaken idea about the 10 Commandments. If we analyze the content of the Bible, we quickly come to a clear conclusion. Both the content and the meaning of the 10 Commandments in the Bible are completely different from what is in the popular consciousness. Let us therefore look at the true history of the 10 Commandments. In today's video, we will once again see how many issues that we take for granted are actually presented differently in the Bible. All we need to do is consult the original text. The history of the 10 Commandments is linked to the figure of Moses. According to the book of Exodus, God, the Lord, who led the Israelites out of Egypt, decided to come down from heaven to Mount Sinai and ordered Moses to mark a boundary around the mountain so that no one would approach it, because otherwise many would pay with their lives. Then, in chapter 20 of the book of Exodus, God speaks to the Israelites. It is precisely from this passage that the famous 10 Commandments, also known as the Decalogue, come from. In the Hebrew version, the proper term is Aseret HaDevarim, which literally means 10 words, or 10 sayings, or 10 things. In the Septuagint, when the Bible was translated into Greek, 10 words was translated as Decalogue, which comes from the Greek Dekalogos. So let's go to chapter 20 of the book of Exodus and see exactly what God said to the Israelites. I'm going to read it word for word, and as you'll see, what God says is much more extensive than what we know as a Decalogue. Let's focus and listen. I quote, "Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, and showing mercy to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you, or your son, or your daughter, or your father, your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your livestock, nor the stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that belongs to your neighbor. As you have seen, the words that the Lord spoke are significantly longer than those we know from the Decalogue. Among other things, God clearly emphasizes the prohibition of idols or images, and also that he is a jealous God. If we were to consider all these words as the original Decalogue, the original 10 Commandments, their content is somewhat longer than the official 10 Commandments. However, this issue is the least of our concerns. Note that, in fact, the expression 10 words or 10 Commandments is not mentioned here even once. God simply issues orders, which later, from today's perspective, we perceive as the 10 Commandments. Furthermore, according to the Bible, God does not end his discourse with these 10 Commandments spoken. On the contrary, shortly after, God continues his monologue and provides other commandments, including the laws about the altar, criminal laws, family laws, and moral laws. In fact, in the Jewish tradition, there are as many as 613 commandments that God would have transmitted. It is important to note that in the Bible there is also a second description of what we call the 10 Commandments. This time we will find it in the 5th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, from verse 6 to verse 21. I will not read it all, because these words are almost identical. Religious experts note two differences. What is described in the book of Deuteronomy addresses the issue of the Sabbath differently. In the book of Exodus, we read that in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and everything in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Meanwhile, in the book of Deuteronomy, we read that, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. The second difference is that in the book of Exodus, God says first not to covet your neighbor's wife and then his house, while in the book of Deuteronomy it is the opposite. Overall, however, these differences are minor, and the Decalogue of the book of Exodus and the Decalogue of the book of Deuteronomy are essentially the same. It is worth mentioning that the division of the commandments into 10 specific ones can vary depending on the denomination. As we read in Article 2066, the division and numbering of the commandments have been different throughout history. The current catechism is in accordance with the division of commandments established by St. Augustine, which has become traditional in the Catholic Church. A similar division is found among the Lutheran denominations. The Greek Church Fathers developed a somewhat different division, which is observed in the Orthodox churches and in the Reformed communities. However, this is a marginal issue. Let us therefore address a more important topic than the division of the 10 Commandments. As we have seen, the Bible twice describes the aforementioned 10 Commandments, which were later singled out from a much larger number of commandments. Let us recall what actually happened after God spoke the commandments to the Israelites. In chapter 24 of the book of Exodus, we read the following words. The Lord said to Moses, "Come to me on the mountain and stand there, and I will give you tablets of stone and the law and the commandments which I have written, that you may teach them." In the popular view, this is what everyone knows as the 10 Commandments. But the reality is that the 10 Commandments in the Bible are only a part of the whole law. That is, the Torah, the tablets, which Moses received from God, contain much more than these 10 words. For the Torah is composed of 613 commandments, including both moral and ritual laws. This is crucial information, which shows us that the commandments are only a small fraction of the total law, which involves, for example, all matters related to daily life and religious life. It is a mistake to think that the 10 Commandments are everything that God said. In fact, what God actually says goes far beyond the 10 Commandments. He also tells the Israelites that they must sacrifice, that they must give alms, that they must follow traditions and rituals. Therefore, the 10 words are only an introduction to the entire Torah. This is why it is so important to discuss the Ten Commandments critically, because many people claim that if we only follow these commandments, we will be on the path to salvation. The truth is that the words that were spoken are only a summary of the divine order. Here the question arises, are God's laws really given to us? Are they valid? The first thing to understand is that the Decalogue is an extremely important element of revelation, but it should not be seen as the only source of moral knowledge. According to the tradition of the Catholic Church, both the Bible and the tradition of the Church have value and morals. This is a view that is valid in relation to all Christian denominations. In order not to remain just in theory, let us now discuss the practice. Based on the book of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy, let us ask ourselves what we can learn from the morality presented to us by God. The first commandment is, "You shall have no other gods before me." In the Jewish tradition, this is an order that prohibits idolatry, that is, having other gods. On the other hand, in the broader sense, it is a commandment that tells us that God must always come first in life. Each of us must ask ourselves whether he really occupies this position in our lives, or whether we often give priority to other issues that are not important. The second commandment is, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above." This is an order that teaches us not to have idols. So, what happens if you have an idol? It is a very serious sin, because idolatry is a sign of a lack of faith. The third commandment is, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." This is a command that teaches us not to use God's name frivolously or to deceive others. What happens if we do this? It is a direct offense to God. The fourth commandment is, "Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy." Here we learn that we are to have a day of rest, and that we are to use this day to focus on God. It is a day of reflection, meditation, and an opportunity to reconnect with our Creator. The fifth commandment is, "Honor your father and mother." This is a command that teaches us to respect our parents and family members. When we dishonor our parents, we also dishonor God. The sixth commandment is, "Thou shalt not kill." Here the command teaches us that human life is sacred. Every life is a gift from God and must be respected. The seventh commandment is, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." This teaches us that fidelity is an essential value in all relationships. And when we are unfaithful, we hurt not only our spouse, but also God. The eighth commandment is, "Thou shalt not steal." This teaches us to respect the property of others. The ninth commandment is, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." This is a command that teaches us to value truth. The 10th commandment is, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house." This is a command that teaches us to be content with what we have. As we can see, the 10 commandments are a summary of the moral law. But on the other hand, they also contain a lesson that should be practiced in everyday life. These principles should be our guide, a reference in life. If we take the 10 commandments as a basis, they will help us to live according to God's will. The most important point, however, is that we must not forget that we are not just talking about rules and regulations, but about a relationship that we must maintain with God. It was composed before the form of the covenant, and only later was what we know as the 10 Commandments officially recorded in the book of Deuteronomy and added to the book of Exodus. Later, scholars maintain that, in fact, both versions of the commandments were written in parallel. Some even claim that the ritual Decalogue could have appeared later. Biblical scholar Richard Fried believes that both Decalogues were written by different authors. The curious thing is that, although in the book of Exodus the 10 words appear precisely in ritual matters, in the book of the repeated law, they do not appear in the 10th chapter. In verse 4 of the book of Deuteronomy, it is written, "And he wrote on tablets, as before, the 10 words which the Lord spoke to you on the mountain, in the midst of the fire, on the day of the assembly, and the Lord gave them to me." According to this fragment, the 10 words would be words spoken at the beginning of the meeting on Mount Sinai and would be the official ones. However, it is not known how it really was, since this text may have been written after the writing of the ritual Decalogue. The so-called documentary hypothesis identifies the ritual Decalogue as a work of the priests of the kingdom of Judah and the Code of the Covenant as a work of the scholars of Israel. Both would have been written independently. The fact is that, according to the book of Exodus, the tablets contain the ritual decalogue, which deals with how the God Yahweh should be worshipped. The covenant has practical and physical foundations, and has little to do with morality and ethics. It is a kind of pact made between two parties. Yahweh tells them what he expects of them, and in return, he helps the Israelites in their fight against other nations. As we can see, the Ten Commandments are a very complex subject. It seems that there could have been two different sets of decalogue, and, contrary to popular opinion, the tablets of the covenant did not contain the commandments that we know. Let us, however, move on to a more important part. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, in Articles 2059 to 2060, describes the Ten Commandments as a way of life. We read that the 10 words indicate the conditions of life freed from the slavery of sin. The 10 Commandments define the requirements of love for God and neighbor. The Council of Trent teaches that the 10 Commandments are more than Christian, and that man is still obliged to respect them. The commandments acquire a certain meaning within the covenant. According to the Holy Scriptures, the moral life of man has all its meaning in the covenant and through the covenant. These are all, without a doubt, beautiful and flowery words. But let us consider a fundamental question. What, in fact, is the relationship of these 10 commandments, even if they were the ones officially known to us, as people who are not Israelites? Where does the idea that the 10 Commandments are God's covenant with humanity come from? If we think about it for a moment, the answer is obvious. The 10 Commandments, whether they are the ethical or the ritual decalogue, or perhaps both, apply exclusively to the Israelites. The 10 Commandments are the covenant made between God Yahweh and the Israelites. These commandments were not for anyone else. The Bible makes this very clear. God had no intention of making any covenants with other people. After all, don't we read that he promised to drive out the nations before them? When we read the Decalogue, we see that it is a set of basic moral norms that originally applied to the followers of Judaism and were then accepted in their past form by Christians. Traditional Jewish rabbinical beliefs hold that the observance of these commandments and other places in the Torah is required exclusively of the Jewish people, and the laws that apply to humanity in general are set forth in the 7 Noahide laws, some of which overlap with the 10 Commandments. The Encyclopedia Britannica states that they describe the conditions that the community of Israel accepted in relation to Yahweh. Traditional Jewish beliefs hold that these commandments, among the 613, refer exclusively to the Jewish people, and the laws that apply to the rest of humanity are defined in the 7 Noahide laws. The point is quite simple. God Yahweh was interested only in the Israelites, and that is why Jewish tradition makes a distinction between the commandments that refer exclusively to them and the 7 Noahide laws that apply to all humanity. Only later, in the process of forming Christianity, were these commandments included in this religion. However, these commandments were supposed to apply exclusively to the followers of Judaism. As I mentioned, God Yahweh always emphasizes that he establishes the covenant exclusively with the Israelites, those whom he brought out of the land of Egypt. He also clearly emphasizes that he will drive out and destroy other nations, such as the Amorites, the Hittites, or the Canaanites. What would be the point if God wanted to establish a universal covenant focused exclusively on a single group of people? That is why he ordered them to conquer the neighboring peoples and massacre the civilian population, destroying their altars and confiscating their goods. For him, only this one people counted, and the commandments he dictated were exclusively for them. Let us look again. Behold, I establish a covenant before all your people, and I will do wonders such as have not been done in all the earth among any nation, and all the people among whom you are will see the work of the Lord, which I will do with you. They are terrible. Observe what I command you today. I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Hivites. Be careful not to make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, so that they do not become a snare between you, but destroy their altars. Here it is clearly written with whom he wants to establish the covenant. But let us move on. Returning to the official Decalogue, we read there's some new moral norms. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or anything that belongs to your neighbor. God Yahweh, in establishing the covenant with the Israelites, imposed a series of norms and prohibitions that applied to his community. Each time we read Yahweh's commands, it becomes clear that he is addressing the Israelites, his group of people, a group of people for whom he dictated clear laws that applied exclusively to them. The Israelites were to behave appropriately towards one another. However, in relation to other peoples, there were other rules, often such that the consequences were death and theft. This brings us to other commandments that we read in the official Decalogue. God, as we know, forbids the making of any image or sculpture of what is in heaven above. If we consider that Christians believe that these commandments also apply to them and try to relate them to what contemporary churches are like, it can undoubtedly be concluded that, currently, the faithful do not follow this order from God. Now let's move on to the fifth commandment, known as thou shalt not kill. And once again we find an attempt to create the myth of a benevolent God who supposedly forbids people from killing each other. However, as we remember from many episodes, God Yahweh categorically killed people, both Israelites and their enemies. As linguists point out, the most appropriate translation of the Hebrew word ratzak would be in Polish, to kill and not to kill. This commandment, therefore, deals with the same thing as other commandments, maintaining order in the camp of the Israelites. Just as the Israelites were not to kill each other or commit adultery, in the same way they were not to kill each other, shedding innocent blood. God had nothing against the Israelites killing those who committed some transgression. In fact, there is a long list of actions in the Bible that, according to God, should result in death. Let us listen to what was said one chapter after, thou shalt not kill. If anyone strikes someone so that the wounded man dies, he shall be put to death. But if he does not expect it, and God allows him to fall into your hands, I will appoint him a place to which he may flee. But if anyone dares to kill his neighbor treacherously, even to tear him from the altar, he shall be put to death. Whoever strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. Whoever kidnaps a person and sells him, or if he is found still in his hands, he shall be put to death. This clearly shows that the commandment, thou shalt not kill, pertains to the Israelites and not to the surrounding nations. To conclude the question of the Ten Commandments, it is important to know that they were made in a completely different context, in relation to a specific group. Attempting to enmesh these moral norms in contemporary society is, at best, a difficult challenge, which raises a number of additional questions. This brings us to an important consideration of how morality was constructed among the Israelites and the changes that occurred with Christianity. When we read the words of God in the Holy Scriptures, we can see that he was, in fact, a kind of military leader. Over time, through what the Holy Scriptures report, we can see how, in fact, Yahweh's morality, when it came to other peoples, was completely different, and the only expectation of the Israelites was that they behave appropriately towards each other. This aspect of the Ten Commandments is a series of laws that cannot be applied to contemporary society, and, therefore, the idea that they can be an element of Western morality is erroneous. This is what Jewish tradition tells us. The 7 laws of Noah refer to all humans, while the 10 commandments are directed exclusively to the Israelites. However, it is necessary to remember that the moral rules of Christians were completely redefined in relation to the guidelines that were established in Judaism. In the case of Christians, while many of the commandments still apply, they have been reinterpreted and have in fact come to be understood in a much broader way. Christian morality is not the same as Jewish morality. The Christianization of the Decalogue and the laws that applied to the peoples living around it, and what happened during the expansion of the church, meant that this morality began to develop in a completely different way than what was envisaged in the traditions of Jewish morality. This leads us to reflect on the origin of the concept of morality. What is good and what is bad? Throughout human history, many attempts have been made to establish a standard of morality, and many of them were a matter of religious faith. But what happens if we consider that morality is something completely different from what we know? If we go back to the time of primordial societies, we could argue that good and evil were largely a matter of survival. It could be argued that an ethical morality emerges from the struggle for life. For a long time, morality was therefore linked to practical conditions and the struggle for survival. However, over time, these aspects have become increasingly complex. What is happening now is that, in the context of Christianity, the norms that emerged in antiquity have been completely reinterpreted. Christianity has brought a series of new ideas that were neither necessary nor offered before. Love is an important aspect of Christian morality, but it was not known in the Jewish commandments. The proposal of Christianity and its ethical demands have become completely different from what was observed before. Thus, when communities began to develop, morality had to be reinterpreted again. Morality, on the one hand, has become a much more complex issue, but on the other hand, this does not mean that previous traditions are unimportant. Moral development has led to different understandings of moral behavior and the need for change. This is why morality, in many ways, is a social issue linked to the relationships that arise between individuals. We can therefore say that morality has its origins in social life and in the interactions that exist between individuals. What happens with relationships and morality is that, over time, expectations, norms, and customs can change. This leads us to the consideration that morality is a historical phenomenon and therefore cannot be rigidly linked to written laws. This relationship is a bond based on love. The Ten Commandments are therefore an expression of God's love, and if we are able to live them, we will be better people, both in our relationship with God and in our relationship with others. If you found this analysis of the Ten Commandments and their relationship with morality interesting, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications so you don't miss our next videos. Your opinion is very important to us, so comment below what you think about the topic. Let's deepen our knowledge together and reflect on issues that impact our lives. Until next time,